Okay, good morning. I should have put my countdown timer on. I was fiddling with too many different things. Good morning. I hope you're having a great day. And if it's not morning for you, happy whatever time it is. And I hope you're having a great Friday, if it's Friday for you, or if you're watching this on a replay or much later, then again, have a great day regardless. So this is John Ball with the Daily Present. And today I thought, because I've been getting a lot of questions about my podcasting this week, I figured that's what I was going to talk about, have a chat about some of the guests, a bit of my podcasting journey. So that's the subject of today's Daily Present. Join me after my new title sequence. Let me know what you think, if you like the new titles, and we'll be back talking about podcasting. Okay, I hope you like the new title sequence. I think it's pretty fun, right? And get you in that morning feeling, whatever time of day it is for you. So today I'm talking a little bit about my journey into podcasting, because I now have two podcasts because I must be insane. One is probably a bit better known than the other. So Speaking of Influence has been my podcast since towards the end of 2019. And my new podcast, Points of Change, is just coming up for a big official launch. So although some of the episodes have been going out live, it's actually still very much in its launch phase. It's an interesting time, and it's an interesting experience. And I know that a lot of people are curious about why even do podcasting. I've been asked about that several times, even just this week. And the reason why I started it is kind of a weird one. I actually started podcasting back in 2008. And so if only I'd stuck with it, who knows where my podcast would be right now. And interestingly enough, one of the very first people I ever asked to be a guest on my podcast, and although I never did it, was Lewis Howes. And Lewis Howes now has one of the most popular podcasts in the world, one of the most downloaded podcasts in the world. If only I'd brought him on back then, if only I'd stuck with it, the ifs, woulds, could, shoulds, buts, and all that. But I didn't. I did probably a grand total of 4 episodes, and had probably one of the very first ever cases of pod fade, where I pulled away from it. And I guess I just didn't have a clear direction with it. Now, in my Toastmasters club here in Valencia, one of the project's options on my effective coaching pathway was to start a podcast. And I figured, well, I had been thinking about coming back to it anyway. I love podcasts. I listen to a lot of them. Some of them really good. Some of them, okay, not always great. There's fiction podcasts. There's true crime podcasts. There's lots of non-fiction podcasts about all sorts of different topics. So whatever your interest, whatever your area is, you can talk about what's interesting or what you're passionate about with people who also share either relevant information or share your passion as well. So that's one of the reasons why I thought it could be good to get back into it. So that was my Toastmasters project. I did that and decided, hey, I think I quite enjoyed that. I enjoyed my very first episode with my good friend Aida, who came to be my co-host, really. Rather than my guest, she was my co-host. And we had a really great chat about the dark side of influence. We talked about things like people being persuaded into things they don't want to do, cults, and all sorts of stuff. It was a pretty cool episode. And so I kept it going, initially just probably once a month, just for the first few months. And then it was such a fun thing to do that I decided to start making the episodes weekly. I think it went from monthly to fortnightly, then to weekly, fairly quickly, and has stayed weekly, sometimes twice weekly, because I'm putting out a lot of new live stuff now as well. And it's been a wonderful journey. Now, I've done some workshops for people on podcasting, and there's one question that always comes up in those workshops, and it's always about monetization. And probably that's the one question I get asked about podcasting, and especially when I do workshops about it, more than any other. How do you monetize your podcast? And well, to be honest, if you haven't got a podcast right now, and the reason you want to start it is to monetize it, I would say don't start a podcast. That would be my advice. Don't start a podcast if you aren't actually interested in the subject or just doing it because you love it. Um, there are some, I think the last stats I saw was something like there's over 1.3 million podcasts now. The reality with that is that the majority of those podcasts are don't last. They don't last. People get, it's a very common phrase now, to have pod fade. So the majority don't get past 6 or 7 episodes. I've seen a few that barely got past 2. Some maybe get to 1 season and then sort of disappear for various reasons. And maybe in some cases that's all they wanted to do. But if you think it's going that the audience is suddenly going to appear, that everything's just going to happen automatically, you know that we can thank Kevin Costner for the Field of Dreams idea that if you build it, they will come, which is rubbish. It's not the case. You do the podcast unless you already have a following, unless you do a really good job of promoting it, and you have a good launch strategy, the audience will not come. And so it's a very curious area. I can say if you're thinking about doing it at all, I really do recommend to do it. It's probably one of the best things I've ever done in my life, but it does take up a lot of time. That's just the reality of it. It's like if you don't have if you're not willing to give the time to it, and if you're not willing to know that the results might not show for it for quite a while, then go for it. Enjoy it. You will make amazing connections if you have a guest format show. There are some really good platforms for bringing guests onto your show as well, which I would encourage you to get onto. Sites like Matchmaker.fm, Podbooker, just some examples of places where you can go and promote your show to people who might be good guests, and they can come and tell you why they'd be a good guest, and you could potentially go and be a guest on other people's shows. I'd say if you're thinking about being a podcaster, that's probably the first step I would recommend, is to go and guest on some other people's podcasts. Get a bit of a taste for it first before you start investing and fixing up your own. Not necessarily a path you should take, but it's probably a pretty good idea if you're thinking of doing it, because you can also have a chat with those podcasters. Sometimes you'll chat before the show, and usually there's a good chance to have a bit of a chat afterwards as well, that you can discuss your ideas and thoughts about podcasting, get recommended, get connected to people who they give you as well. I figure sometimes people want to know about guests that I've had on the show, because I have had some quite high profile guests, people who I never would have imagined would be willing to come on my little old show, who've said, yeah, I'll come on your show. And that's been really cool. I think the first time that happened was bringing Mike Michalowicz on. And that was thankfully to the wonderful Lee Hayes, who is his agent, who I had on the show. Her episode was fantastic as well. And I had no idea that she was connected with Mike. And so that was fantastic to get him on as well. But I'd say also, I ended up reading a book called Storyworthy, which was with Matthew Dix, who is a multiple-time winner of the Moth Story Slam contest and the Grand Slam contest in the US, which is I think it's a similar format to Toastmasters to some degree, like a 5-minute story. You have 5 minutes to tell a story, and he is an excellent storyteller, and so good that he's won this competition multiple times, and very good at humorous stories, really emotional stories, and really good with the sort of pathos side of things. And after reading his book, I read it 3 times because it was so good, and I still will go back and read it. It's like my reference Bible for storytelling. That I asked him if he'd come and be on the show, and he said yeah. And again, that was an incredible episode. It's not always the case, though. Interestingly, it's not always the case that the well-known people who you can get on your show are not necessarily always the best interviews. I mean, in those cases, they were fantastic. I think I had my 25 minutes with Mike Michalowicz. Matthew Dix gave me, I think, an hour and a half of his time. I ended up splitting it into 2 episodes. I had Simon Lancaster on recently, who is quite a well-known TED speaker and political speechwriter. And again, it was really a testament to the power of asking, that if you do this and you're committed and you're passionate about it, ask the people who you want to be on your show and give them a reason. Tell them why you want them to be on it. Right now, I mean, we're still in time of pandemic. We're not all fully vaccinated yet and the likes. So it could be that now is a really good time to get the guests who might otherwise struggle to get on because they'll be booked with speaking events and things like that. Last year, and still doing this, but last year I was doing a whole series on comedy and humorous presentations. And it was an opportunity for me to take advantage of the fact that a lot of comedians are not getting bookings whilst they're in quarantine. So they had not that much better things to do with their time than to come and be on a podcast. Lucky for me, not so great for them. But these are things that, okay, well, there is opportunity there. So depending on what you want to do and the kind of thing you want to put out there, if you're doing a guest-based podcast, I think now is a really good time to do it. I do think podcasting is still in its earlier days. And I do think, probably now is the best time to go into it. I see people like Pat Flynn, who is like an excellent podcaster, who has a huge following and teaches other people how to do this, saying things like, get into this now. 2021 is the time to do this because it probably is going to become a much more popular and crowded field because podcasts are becoming more and more popular. But I would also say, you need to put out something that you care about. If your thing is making people laugh or just having funny conversations, and that's what you want to do a podcast about, great. If you're really into, I don't know, neuroscience, or if you're really into some level of psychology, you like talking about medicine, so that's a good example. Like my friend Shan Hussein, Dr. Shan, is a successful podcaster with his podcast, Enduring Health. He's done really well. And that's an area that he's passionate about and that he works in and has been able to add a lot of value and have a lot of great conversations and has the connections already to bring some great guests on. So, it's good to talk about stuff that you're an expert in, but also good to talk about stuff that's just fun or interesting or enjoyable to you. A lot of the story-based science fiction and crime novels and things like this podcasts do really, really well. The true crime stuff, although I'm not very into it myself, does really, really well. So get your ideas together. If you want help or suggestions on podcasting, I'm happy to offer whatever help I can. But I do encourage you, especially if you're doing anything that's going to be guest-based, check out matchmaker.fm. I think James Mulvaney can really help you out with that, with stuff he's done there. It's a wonderful site. Podbooker is a really cool one as well that you can definitely check out. You can set up free profiles on these places, Podmatch as well. These are the main ones that I use to connect with guests, whether I want to be on someone else's show or whether it's coming to be on mine. Those are the main places I use to connect with people. And so I highly recommend them to you. And if you are wondering where to put your podcast, it depends. I would say it depends on where you're at. If you're happy, if you want something that's really, you want to go for the cheapest option, you don't want to invest a lot of money into it, use Anchor. But understand this, that Anchor doesn't have much customer support, and it's you will have to do a lot of the things like connecting up to the podcast networks yourself. It's not going to be particularly automated for you, but it does have some really good functionality. It's not that hard to use, and you can get started really quickly on a low budget. If you do have a bit of money to spend and you want a bit of help with the production and the rollout, and you have big podcasting dreams, take a look at podcast.co, which is from James Mulvaney again, his podcast hosting. I have my Speaking of Influence podcast with Buzzsprout currently. Still debating whether I'll stay with them, but I mean, not because they're not good, they're excellent, but because I may actually base all of my podcasts with podcast.co, which is where I'm launching my new show. So there's lots of options, and they're certainly not the only ones. There are plenty of hosting options for podcasts, some of them free, some of them a bit more expensive, some of them super expensive. If you want the production done for you, the transcriptions and things like that, you're going to end up spending money on your podcast. Or if you want to save money, you'll end up paying with time instead. So really, those are some of my thoughts about podcasting. I don't regret for a moment my podcasting journey. I absolutely love it. I love doing podcasting. I don't make money from podcasting. It would be nice, if coming up in my second year, well into my second year of podcasting. But if that's why I was doing it, I really wouldn't be sticking with it. And that's why I say, if that's your goal for podcasting, unless you have a really solid strategy, I don't recommend it. I'm not a fan of people who ask for payment to be on other people's podcasts, or they ask podcast hosts to pay them to being the guest. I mean, take your pick and choose for yourself. But it's not really how I like to operate in the podcasting world. Mostly it's networks of people who are really happy to give, who understand that there is huge promotional value, even in a show that might be new and starting out. In my earliest days of podcasting, people who I really had no right to get as guests on my show said yes to coming on, and to my little show with hardly any audience. And thank you to them for doing that. They're the people who gave me encouragement to keep going with it, encouragement to keep asking people who I just thought, well, I shouldn't ask them. They're far too well known, far too important. They're never going to come on my show. Go and ask them anyway, because they just might. I had some no's, and I'll be honest with you, the no's have been either no, not right now, or no, maybe doing more sort of regular media stuff for people who are sort of a bit more in the mainstream side of things, who don't really have so much time for podcasts and the likes. And they've all been very nice, and everyone has been super helpful. So I've never really had a response of telling me to get lost or anything like that. Either people don't respond at all, or they're just super nice about it. But sometimes they also say yes, and that is a real testament to me of just how far you can get just from asking. And so that's what I'd say to anyone: ask and give it a go, try it out, see if you enjoy it, see if you have fun with it. If you do, great, you'll find something that is a growing industry that does have the potential to make you some money, if not right away, and that you can hopefully have a lot of fun with, and certainly get connected with lots of amazing people. I would say absolutely do it. Go for it anyway, regardless. And I would be happy to give you encouragement. I may even consider being a guest on your show if you'd want me. And so and maybe you'd like to be a guest on mine. Who knows? So it could be a nice quid pro quo situation, right? So that's pretty much it for me. I would like to know people's thoughts on my new title sequence. I think it's a bit more fun. I'm going to close the show off with my new outro as well. I'll see you back again next week for more from the Daily Present. Do join me later today if you can. I'm speaking live with Dave Bricker, who is an author and a coach, a really incredible guy, super interesting, doing another live of Speaking of Influence later on today. So join me live for that if you can. We'll see you next time.